Have you ever opened up a sewing pattern or watched a sewing tutorial and had absolutely no idea what they're talking about? Odds are, if you've started this sewing journey, you have, and I promise you, it's no easy task. That's why I'm here to act as your guide to sew the perfect project. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the most basic of sewing terms and providing some definitions and examples along the way. For any and every sewing project, the number one component is going to be material or fabric. But how well do you understand the fabric? There are obviously several different types of fabric, from cottons to silks, laces to satins. All of these terms are going to apply to each one. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to be using mostly cotton fabric. When working with fabric, you'll have two sides. One side being the right side of the fabric, also called the front or face of the fabric, and the opposite being the wrong side. The right side is the side that's intended to be seen, the exterior of the project, whereas the wrong side is intended to be towards the lining or hidden away. It's easiest to tell the right and wrong side of the fabric when you have fabrics with a pattern on it. But in some cases, like denim fabric, there is no difference between the right and the wrong, so it's up to you to decide which one you're going to use. The right side of the fabric could be the one with the less defects or creases or anything like that, whereas the wrong side could be the damaged side or the side that's not as colorful. But whatever you choose, you have to make sure you're consistent throughout your entire project. The next few terms are technically weaving or knitting terms, but they still apply when talking about your fabric, since your fabric was woven together at some point, whether you made it yourself or it was woven together by a manufacturer. The warp of the fabric is the threads or other fibers used to make the fabric that run in a longitudinal direction, up and down, top to bottom of the fabric, whereas the weft of the fabric runs left to right in a transverse direction. Knowing the difference between the warp and the weft of your fabric is going to help you determine the direction for cutting out your pattern pieces. It's also going to help you with this next term, the bias. The bias is the direction of the fabric that is 45 degrees from the warp and the weft of the fabric. Naturally, every piece of fabric is going to have two biases. This is also where the fabric is probably going to have the most stretch. On your pattern pieces, the bias is indicated by an arrow or a line. So you're going to use that pattern piece and turn it to match the bias of your fabric. And finally, the last fabric term we're going to talk about is the salvage edge. The salvage edge is the finished edge of the fabric that runs parallel to the warp, and it's created by the weft. The difference is it's the finished edge. Knowing where your salvage is will also help you in placing your pattern pieces. Now that you know the correct directions of the fabric, you can lay out your pattern pieces appropriately and cut them out the right way. For more help on cutting out pattern pieces, check out my how-to video up in the cards. When sewing your project together, you can use a variety of different stitches, but attaching two pieces of fabric together is going to create what's called a seam. The seam is the line created by the thread that holds the two pieces of fabric together. When you're sewing a project together, you'll see what's mentioned as a seam allowance. A seam allowance is the area between the edge of the fabric and the stitching line that you're about to sew between two or more pieces of material. Seam allowances can range from 1/4 inch to 5/8 of an inch, though the standard seam allowance is usually 5/8 of an inch. The most common type of stitch you're going to use is a straight stitch. A straight stitch is exactly what it sounds like. You're stitching a straight line when there's nothing really elaborate. It's the most basic stitch that any sewing machine is going to use. It's also called the running stitch, and it's the stitch that all others are derived from, including a basting stitch, which is probably the second most common stitch you're going to use. A basting stitch is used to join two pieces of fabric together with long removable stitches, the key being removable. To make a basting stitch, you'll be using the longest stitch length on your machine. It'll temporarily hold your two pieces of fabric together for things later on in your project, like gathering, ruffles. Another common stitch that I use when I'm sewing is a reverse stitch, also known as a back stitch. This stitch is used at the beginning and the end of the stitch to help prevent unraveling and pulling apart of the seam. Most machines have a lever or pedal to put it in reverse to make this stitch. The reverse stitch is usually sewn on top of the previous stitch to hide the line. Serging is the binding off of an edge of fabric. This is done with a serging machine, finishing off the seam with an elaborate, almost decorative stitch. If you flip over your t-shirt or any kind of clothing you're wearing, odds are it's got some serging in it. Using a serging machine, you cut off the raw edge of the fabric and encase it into the serging. This prevents the fabric from unraveling in the future and provides a professional appearance. The last section we're going to talk about in this level 1 video are the types of fabrics you're going to be used in basic sewing. You know how to sew the pieces together, but which fabric is which? Here's a few types you'll become very familiar with. Muslin is a type of fabric used to make test garments. The fabric is usually made out of cotton. It's very inexpensive and available in large bulk. It's a very good idea to make a test garment out of muslin before you use your very nice, expensive fabric that you just bought at the fabric store. This way you can get any mistakes, rips, holes out of the way and not on your expensive fabric. Lining is an inner layer of fabric used to provide a nice, neat finish. It helps hide seam allowances, interfacing, and any construction details that went into making this garment. It can also be used for layering with overlays like lace. The lining can be made of the same type of material as the exterior fabric, or it's usually a nice, softer fabric because it is going to be right up against the skin. Interfacing is a type of fabric used to provide structure to a fashion fabric. There are many different types of interfacing, the most common being sew-in interfacing and iron-on interfacing. My personal favorite is iron-on interfacing because it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to apply. You put the interface on, tacky side down, iron it on, which melts the glue, for lack of a better word, and it's attached to your fabric. You don't have to worry about an extra step of sewing. Just like regular fabrics, interfacing is available on the bolts by the yard at your fabric store. And lastly, while you're out at the fabric store, don't forget about your notions. Notions are small tools that are used in sewing projects like zippers, hooks and eyes, and buttons. Notions are usually listed on the back of your pattern, but they can be easy to miss, so make sure you look over it with a careful eye to avoid multiple trips to the store. But if you're like me and you're looking for an excuse to go to the fabric store, you may not care so much. But it's also a good idea to have a big stock of notions on hand in your sewing kit. Congratulations! You've completed level 1 of the sewing vocabulary video. If I were your first grade teacher, I'd give you a gold sticker, but since I'm stuck in your screen, this is gonna have to do. I hope this video helped you understand the sewing terminology and vocabulary, and I hope to help you gain confidence on your sewing journey. If you're ready for level 2, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and you have your notification bells turned on so you don't miss a video going live. If I helped you out at all today, please make sure you like this video. We are on our way to 500 subscribers, and when we do, we will unlock and level up with our new artwork, with our new rebrand. So make sure you're subscribed, you've liked this channel, tell your friends about it if you think that this will help them. And until then, I'll see you next time. Happy sewing!